Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Oh,
Hey, Rory.
Hello. My camera is on the fritz, so I apologize. But it is nice to see all of you. How's it going?
Pretty good. It's Friday. I'm super excited it's Friday. I'm extra
Yay,
excited.
Jordana.
That's fantastic. What's been going on this week? Like, what's up with everybody?
My boss is quitting, so I'm getting yet another new boss in a few weeks, maybe.
Oh,
Wow. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, we got reorged the day before we got shut down for the pandemic. So that was almost 6 months ago now. So I've had this new boss for 6 months and I've only met him in person once.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah, and I guess, it's just the uncertainty, and especially because we're looking at the Haas model and all those things. This guy was on board with all that stuff, and we were working out a plan of how we were going to get there, and now he's going to be gone. Oh well, stuff happens. Change is good, right?
Yeah, I think so. Sometimes.
Margaritas are
inevitable
good
anyway.
too.
True story.
Hi, this is Barb. I don't know why my screen is black. Sorry.
That's okay, Barb. At least we can hear you.
Yeah, that's a plus. Well, maybe. I don't know. Depends on your perspective, probably. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Is something like over your camera or?
No, I just tried that because I did have the embarrassing experience of contacting IT to say my camera wasn't working, and it had a shutter that I didn't know it had, that I had slid to the position where the camera was covered, but that's not the problem right now.
Got you. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for being here. And we have two people that are joining us to talk to us about onboarding volunteers during COVID, which is awesome. And thank you, Kelly, for all of your organizing of getting these awesome speakers to us today.
thank you.
And so we have Barb here today from Humane Rescue Alliance and Alyssa from KC Pet Project. And we're going to be talking about really trying to focus in on how do we utilize volunteers, keep people safe, and keep onboarding volunteers and keep using volunteers while the pandemic is happening. So I think for some of the folks on this call, this is your first time joining us. So thank you so much for being here. And for others of you, we have our core little, we have like our group. So it's always nice to see all of these familiar faces that I get to see each Friday. But this is really a casual space where we just kind of like chat and try to work through things. So if you have anything to add at any time, feel free to just chime in. And if the conversation kind of lags, I'll probably start picking on people. So we're gonna start with each of our speakers talking for about just a few minutes about what their experiences have been with this. And so, Barb, you wanna kick us off?
Oh, look, I'm here.
There you are.
If you were talking to me, I missed it because I decided if I popped out and back in, maybe it would just do that magic reset thing. So.
Yeah, if you want to just kick us off and take a few minutes to introduce yourself and any of the topics that you wanted to cover today. And
Sure. So I'm Barbara Hutcherson, and I am currently the Director of Volunteer Programs at Humane Rescue Alliance in Washington, D.C. I'm new in that role. I started in April, so just hit 90 days at the end of July. And it's been a really interesting time to start a brand new job where you never get to see your coworkers except on a screen, or the volunteers that I'm supposed to be energizing and engaging and keeping engaged during a pandemic. So I have some unique perspective on that. My history before that is running a nonprofit organization called Lost Dog and Cat Rescue in the Northern Virginia area. And I did that for the better part of 16 years. And it's an all volunteer run organization. So that's where I have my experience and where I grew my big girl pants about volunteers, because that's all we had. The only paid staff were animal care staff. And so we're doing anywhere, it was close to 3,000 adoptions a year at one point. It was usually around 2,000. So decent sized operation with just volunteers doing every bit of the admin and running adoption events and all the parts of it. So it's interesting to bring that perspective to a municipal organization that has a very different sort of background and experience with volunteers. And I'm tasked to bringing some of that can do. Volunteers can do it. Of course they can. Let's get the volunteers, you know, in all parts of the organization from my experience into HRA. And as I said, it's been pretty interesting. Kelly, I don't know, or Rory, either one of you, are there more specific things you wanted me to talk about?
I think like onboarding volunteers during COVID. I know you guys are not onboarding new ones, but you're developing more positions.
Okay. Yeah, so that's been really interesting. So we both had a lot of success and are stalled at the same time in different ways. So we kept doing that. We moved the initial orientation that was always in person online. And so we moved people through that, but then they couldn't go anywhere because the former model required the next step was in person. And at first we didn't have volunteers in the building hardly at all. So they just got stuck. They could help with things like our pet pantry or some remote stuff, but having only just gone through an online orientation, they didn't develop any real connection to the organization, any, you know, just real like, yeah, let me get in there and help out, or confidence that they had anything to offer because they hadn't had a chance yet. So we're working hard on revamping the entire orientation process to be online and then a mentor session, and taking away what they had before was groups would come in and work with one of the volunteer staff or a volunteer trainer to get ready for their on-site volunteering. And of course, we're not going to bring groups of people in, but what we can do is do training sessions online with basics, and then they can meet one-on-one with a mentor, and it's easier to maintain social distance and move around the building that way. So we're working really hard on getting that up and running, but we have one of the ways I would say that we are having the most success at engaging volunteers is getting them involved in designing the new system. And they're really excited about it. So I stole 100% from the Haas model, and we created working groups. And we just got started the working group that is helping us create this mentor program. So instead of us spending hours and countless hours, the three of us who are volunteer program staff, nailing out the details, we've tasked them, we've given them sort of a broad framework and tasked them, given them a set of tools in a Google Drive folder, questions to respond to, tasks to do, like, okay, because we're having them broken down into subject groups. So like dog walking volunteers, cat room volunteers, etc. What are the things, you know, that everyone should know how to do before they can do anything on their own in this area, and check them off and do a feedback form for both. So I'm pretty excited to see what they come back with. We just had our initial meeting with them, and then we've sent them away to have several meetings on their own and then come back to us. So I'm hoping that's gonna work out really well, but it's definitely helped us keep the volunteers engaged. And we've done the weekly video calls, sort of happy hours, but we're all pretty serious here in DC, so we don't actually have happy hour. And the other thing that I did right away, because the unique challenge was I need to get to know these people. We have some of our really high donors are volunteers, and some of them were unhappy, so that was a problem. So I set up a Calendly appointments on my calendar so that any volunteer can just put their name in a slot and have a Zoom call or a regular call with me. And that's helped. And I've been really surprised with the number of people who had only been through the first part and were just excited to volunteer and wanted to meet someone. And so that tells me that we can still keep onboarding them, that they are interested and they are at least somewhat attached.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That all sounds extremely exciting, and I'm sure people will have a lot of questions for you. I know a couple. Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourself and sort of give like some overview too of a similar what you've been doing at?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Alicia. It looks like Alyssa. It's okay. I run the volunteer program at KC Pet Project. So just to give you guys kind of a little bit of a background about our program, we have 1,800 plus volunteers in the program. I would say about 1,100 of those, yes, Kathy, 1,800. About 1,100 of those, I would say, are active, meaning that they volunteered within the past 6 months. So that does include junior volunteers, which we consider any volunteers under 15 years old. So they come in with their parents. We also have a court-ordered community service program. We allow corporate group visits. We have 12 different locations where they can volunteer at. So that kind of explains our numbers too. We're kind of spread out and have a lot of variety of ways that they can get involved and volunteer. So before COVID, our typical setup for orientations and onboarding volunteers was we have our orientation is online. We have an online video that we have them watch. It's about 18 minutes or so, and it basically just goes through the history of the organization, different ways that they can get involved, all the different roles that we have, and just what we're doing in the community. And then after that shelter tour, they can, that orientation, I'm sorry, they can sign up for a shelter tour, and that will be done at the location that they're planning on volunteering at. So it's location specific, since each location is kind of set up differently. We show them around the particular location that they're interested in, so they can see the different roles that are available there, see where they sign in, kind of get the layout for the basic processes and procedures. And then after that tour, they would come in and work with our mentorship team for either a Dog 101 class or a Cat 101 class to get started in whatever area that they're interested in. And then COVID happened. That's kind of like my theme for the past few months, and then COVID. So in, I believe it was April, we suspended all volunteer opportunities on site and went down to basically a skeleton crew. So we weren't taking in any new volunteers. We weren't having any of our current volunteers come in, which was a shame because we had a backlog of about 300 people waiting just to get in the door and start volunteering. So we were pretty bummed out that we had to stop and tell those people to wait. So during that time, we still stayed really active with our volunteers. We volunteer appreciation week was during COVID, which is again a shame, but we stayed active online. We did volunteer appreciation week online. We had a spirit week. People would dress up in the different kinds of swag that they had from our shelter, their volunteer shirts or different things that they bought. We did a trivia night based on information about the shelter. So, you know, we still stayed connected with them, which I think was really, really important to do during that time. And then when we talked about bringing back regular volunteers in June, we sent out a survey to all volunteers just to kind of get an idea of what kind of support we could count on, that we could expect, how they were feeling. And about 43% of the people who responded said that they were ready to return, and everybody else said that they kind of wanted to wait. So based on that number, we felt like we could safely start bringing people back and getting them on scheduled shifts. So we started welcoming volunteers back in June. As for new volunteers that hadn't gone through the process yet, I also sent them a survey to see if they were still interested, and more were interested in returning. About 70% of those people were like, yes, please get me out of the house. I am so interested in doing something. So once we got that kind of response back, we decided that we wanted to try and do shelter tours again. Obviously, it had to look really differently though. So beforehand, we had about 20 people per tour. We've cut that down to 10 people per tour. Everybody has to wear a mask. We social distance the whole time, make sure that everybody stays safe. We also offer them more frequently. We went from one shelter tour a week to about 2 to try and bring in the same amount of people. So we weren't getting too bottlenecked with the people that were interested in returning. And then it went through the same process. They'll sign up for Dog 101 or Cat 101 and start volunteering and working with our mentors. We've cut down the size of those groups to help with that. We are moving to a different, COVID kind of gave us a different perspective. And so our shelter tours starting next month will be about an hour and a half instead of an hour. And during that time, we'll also get them involved with doing enrichment and kennel calming and go over policies and procedures that we usually do during Dog or Cat 101 to try and get them in the door a little bit faster and not make them feel like they have to do kind of multiple trips during this time. And that'll help us with keeping numbers down too. So luckily we've still had really good interest in people interested in volunteering. We've just had to kind of change how we typically get them into the door.
Thank you so much. So does anyone have any questions for the two of these people? Thank you both so much for being here. And it sounds like you're doing amazing work. I see that Erica has a question. Erica, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. I was just wondering if your community service, is that court appointed or is that community service for students? Because one thing we ran into during this is we actually upped our volunteer age because we don't have anybody to supervise minors at this point. And so that's why I asked that.
Yeah, so our court ordered, we do community service for court ordered individuals. They have to be at least 18 and they can't have certain violations. So we only, accept certain ones. For students that need community service hours, they just go through our program like regular volunteers. And for our junior volunteers, we have a 1-to-1 ratio. So 1 adult to 1 child at all times, and that's how we're able to manage that.
I had a question for Barbara.
Sure.
You mentioned that some of your volunteers that are major donors or large donors were upset. Can you tell us what some of their upset was about and how you addressed that?
So some of them had issues with the way the program was run prior to my entry. So I started by contacting on the phone the top 5-10 people who had been identified to me as someone who either was a donor who had some concerns or had been around a long time and had concerns. And I think that actually was perfect because it gave me some chance to start relationships and to ask the people to just tell me everything, like, sorry about the truck. Tell me everything that had upset them. And a lot of it honestly boiled down to communication, that they felt as if they were not communicated with in a completely respectful way or given enough information, like included enough and considered enough. In hearing, like, they felt like big changes would come and they wouldn't know anything about it. They'd show up to volunteer and something would be very different. So things like that were probably the biggest thing. And they had started before I arrived the UNC Charlotte volunteer program assessment. So I followed through with that and those results bore that out, that communication was a big concern. And the other concern was they felt volunteers as a group were appreciated, the idea of volunteers, but they didn't feel like they were appreciated as individuals, which I thought was really interesting and a really important separation. Because I think that when we talk about volunteer appreciation, we tend to think of these things that we do for big groups. But what, and I knew this sort of in my gut, but I was happy to see it play out, that the kind of appreciation a lot of volunteers want is just that you know that their contribution's valuable, you recognize them as individuals, you listen to them, that sort of thing. That seems to matter a whole lot more. So I'm making as much one-on-one contact as I can in the midst of a pandemic. But I also I shadowed some volunteers on their shifts, just reached out to them and said, hey, can I just come, I'm new here, so can I come and volunteer and walk some dogs with you? And just, you tell me how things go and what ideas you have. And that's been really successful.
Any other questions?
I have a question for probably both of you guys. Have you run into any issues with staff being reluctant to onboard new volunteers or even current volunteers that haven't been volunteering? Because so some tasks are, it's relatively easy to keep distance, but other tasks are a little bit more close quarter tasks. So just wondering what your experience was with that.
Barbara, you want to go first?
Okay, sure. Yes, some staff resistance, although one of the other things I did was I went to the care staff's daily meetings and I had talks with them about what was problematic for them about volunteers, what their concerns were about having more of them in the building, what was helpful to them. And so we tailored bringing volunteers back in slowly by groups and established numbers. Like we cut the shifts way down. Like before I got there, they weren't making them sign up for shifts. So people were kind of just showing up, I think. So we broke the news to the volunteers that everybody's gonna have to sign up. And that's the beauty in this terrible thing called COVID, is that it can be the impetus for a lot of things that need to happen anyway. So we made sure that, and I just keep checking with staff, like, do you feel comfortable if we let some volunteers come in? What schedule works for you? What shifts would you like us? When do you want the help? And we're also on a real campaign to get volunteers involved in much more meaningful ways. Kelly mentioned the job descriptions at the beginning. So I've been going to every department director and saying, what needy thing do you have that you need? I can get you help. And the more that happens, they're all so busy that when it starts to be successful, they're starting to really warm up and be less concerned.
Yeah, I would say scheduling played a huge part in it for us as well. When I first started in this position, there was definitely some feelings about volunteers helping in certain roles. So scheduling really helped because I was able to ask staff, like, when do you need the most help? Is it in the morning when you're doing cleaning? Is it when you're trying to wrap things up? Like, what do you need? And then I also sent out a program assessment to all the managers and said, if you had, your pick of any kind of job that you could have in your area, any kind of help that you needed in your area, what would that look like? What would the training look like? What do you need? What would the commitment be? And by doing that really helped me get their buy-in as well, so that I could say, hey, this volunteer matches exactly what you're looking for. Like, let me send her to you, get her started. And once you get that one volunteer in the door that's like the best match for what they're looking for, then they're so much more open to training others and realizing that it really helps their program to spend that time with that particular volunteer and more.
Fantastic. Would either of you, I put this in the chat too, but would it be possible to share some of the job descriptions that you're coming up with? And we can credit both of your organizations in whatever way, but I'd love to add those to our COVID toolkit on our resource page so they're available to everybody if that's possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. We have a few, and we have really been focusing on these job descriptions. And it's making a huge difference. I think the volunteers are excited, the staff's excited. I'm still, having to nudge a lot, but I was really excited that our communications people actually asked for a volunteer to help them with the website, which is just like amazing, big milestone.
So cool. So you were going department by department and asking, like, did you have like specific questions that you were asking each department and then working backwards from there, or what was that process? I know you just spoke to it a little bit, but.
For me, it's been a little bit more organic, and just like as a new employee, I scheduled calls with the directors of every department and heavily said, this is what I want to do. I want to get volunteers to help you. Please tell me how I can help you. Every Zoom call with a group, I always manage to work in, and volunteers could probably help with some of those things. And so then finally, I got a couple of people to say, hey, can you help me get some volunteers? And then we developed a thing where I would talk back and forth with them, and we would then send them a set of questions, like a Google form to fill out for what was needed for this position. from that create a job description that's kind of similar, so they are consistent, send it back to them for approval. And then when we get the responses in the Google spreadsheet, we look at it first for any oh gosh, this volunteer did a great job doing XYZ, or well, here's some concerns we had about that volunteer, and we shoot it back to the department person who wanted the job. And we ideally schedule a Zoom call with them to go through and talk about who might be great candidates. And then we let them decide how much they want us to help with training or how much they want to do it on their own. Because some of them are like, I'd love to have volunteers, I have no time for training. So we assist with that as much as we can.
Yeah, I basically emailed out a form that I had every manager fill out to give me an idea of what help they needed and what that would look like. And the one thing that I did tell them is that I cannot train this volunteer for you. If you need them to do a specific job in your specific department, I need you to be able to commit to training them and putting something in place. So sometimes some of these roles are really simple and the volunteer has a conversation for 10 minutes and then they're ready to go. And so it's nothing. And then other ones are volunteers have to come in a few times, like our adoption counselor roles. They have to come in a few times to do training on the computer and training on our different policies for adoptions and things like that before they can start doing them on their own. So every role that we have, it's had the buy-in from the staff saying like, this is the help that we need and this is what we can commit to training for this volunteer. And then eventually, once they get the volunteers that really know the position, then those volunteers train the other volunteers. So it's really a short-term commitment at first, spending that time with them to get them trained, and then those volunteers train others. So which frees up their time as well.
I love that you mentioned that, because it does seem like it's always this heavy lift at the start, but then it pays off so much. But it's getting the buy-in from staff to even do that heavy lift initially. It's yes, you are probably going to have to dedicate 3 to 4 hours to getting this going, but how much time does that save you later? Yeah, that seems really, really important. And I'm always thinking how do we message that to people? Because I struggle with that too myself, I'm oh my God, I wish that I had a volunteer doing this, but it's always oh God, how do you etch that?
Well, and something that has kind of worked, at least with me when I'm talking to staff, is you were brand new at some point too. You have not always worked in animal welfare. You didn't always have this wealth of knowledge. Every staff member who starts in these positions that maybe you're thinking a volunteer can't do are in the same spot that this volunteer is, and you're taking the time and you're training them and you're investing in that time. So you can do the exact same thing with volunteers, and you might even get more of a investment back from them. So pushing that everybody kind of started from somewhere has helped.
I also would say that one of the things I did too is, so for adoption counselors, for instance, I asked for staff job descriptions for those roles and tried to align the volunteer job description as much as possible so that they would see the overlap. And we just keep talking about these advanced positions, the ones that you're investing heavily in, are like a staff member that's not getting paid. So let's look at them that way. Let's be as professional about it as possible.
One thing that we did in the clinic, because even if we had somebody that was assigned to training to onboard volunteers and they had an outline and it all looked really pretty, when you walk into the clinic, it's just chaos. There's kind of just no getting around it. So we started just telling volunteers up front, it's very chaotic. You're at some point going to have to just jump in and find somewhere to help. Hopefully not, but it's a good possibility that's going to happen, so that they have a very clear understanding of what it's like being in the clinic, instead of kind of painting the pretty picture of this is the training process and this is what we're going to do on day one, because more often than not, that all kind of fell apart. And I felt like it was better to just be honest with volunteers about the chaos and have them walk in 20 minutes later, they're like deer in the headlights, and then they never come back.
We have a syllabus that we use. So, and we do let them know that it may not work out exactly like they think it's going to, dependent on the role, obviously. I can imagine in the clinic it would just be chaotic to try and do the same thing every single time for training. But our mentors have a syllabus that they follow. So even if things get out of order and they don't necessarily start with what they thought they were going to do, or they don't get to all the maybe tasks that are involved with whatever they're doing, that syllabus is what they can reference to say, okay, yeah, we did go over that. Oh, okay, so we need to go over this now, and make sure that they kind of checked all that stuff off. So even if the volunteer didn't necessarily get to do those things, they understand how it works and the policies or procedures behind those items. So the checklist syllabus stuff has helped us with that for sure.
Shelby, did you want to ask your question? She was asking, Alicia, she's on the website that you have a volunteer login, and where does that lead, and what are volunteers able to do it when they log in?
So that volunteer login leads to their volunteer account. We use Volgistics. So they're able to sign into their volunteer account, sign up for shifts, look at their hours, look at the different volunteer opportunities that are available. It just kind of takes them to their account for current volunteers.
Awesome. Have you guys run into any issues? And if so, like how did you guys get past them?
Issues related to COVID, or just issues with the volunteer program?
Onboarding during COVID, is that what you're asking?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I don't know. We got really lucky because a lot of the last year I've spent a lot of time getting a lot of our trainings and our onboarding and stuff like that online. So we got really lucky there. We were already prepared for kind of an online onboarding. Our numbers have definitely changed, and that's been a little bit of a struggle, is trying to plan, you know, when we should have these tours, how often we should have them if we're not at full capacity during the tour. Even with just 10 people, sometimes we'd have 7 people sign up and only 3 people actually show up. So, you know, we've kind of been going back and forth with how we schedule those and how many people we have for it, never exceeding more than 10 people. But we were really lucky. We were really set up to already do online stuff. So we haven't had as much struggle as far as onboarding is concerned with the volunteer program.
I would say that we weren't set up to do virtual and online things, but actually it was good, because I think our organization everyone likes things to be perfect before they move forward. And so COVID's been a great, sometimes you just got to go. You just got to go. Like you put something together, you do the best you can, and then you keep making it better. And that's kind of eye-opening, I think, to a lot of my colleagues, and certainly the 2 other people in my department, that we can do that. And it's not perfect and it needs work, but it's okay. It'll do, and then we'll keep making it better. And so that was both a problem and an opportunity at the same time.
And I'm curious to hear from some of the rest of you guys. Where are you guys at with your volunteer programs right now?
It's Kathy from Brampton. So we're at a municipal shelter with unionized employees. So our volunteer program kind of sort of sucks. And we're working on it through COVID. One of the things we've been doing is working on our foster manual for our foster volunteers. And we've utilized Facebook to advertise for additional wildlife drivers, because here in Ontario, the only people allowed to do wildlife rehab are certified wildlife rehabbers through the province, and you know, nobody is close to us, so we have to drive for an hour at least to take species various places. So we're working on it. I mean, that's why I was like in complete awe of Alicia as far as 1,800 volunteers, 1,100 active volunteers, and 12 locations. I mean, holy Hannah banana. It's just completely unimaginable to me. But I think one of the big things that I've taken away in a number of these other calls is the fact that we need to get away from, you know, sort of one person being solely responsible for this type of thing. So if a volunteer calls, it's like, oh, then they have to talk to that person. Well, that person's busy or not available, and nobody else can talk to them about it. So we're working through some of that stuff as well, and just trying to figure out what it's going to look like ultimately. But as I said, one of our challenges is we have union employees. So a lot of the things that volunteers would often do in shelters, they can't necessarily do because, you know, I was listening to Barbara earlier. We created job descriptions, and adoption counselors, I mirrored the sort of job description for paid staff. I'd be like hung out to dry if I tried to do something. Chris is nodding his head. Yep. So, you know, it's just a different reality for us. But I think one of the things I've always known is the amount of support that a well-run volunteer program needs, because the volunteers need to have that connection. So that's what I was hoping to get from this call, is a little more idea. I mean, you didn't mention, I don't think, Alicia, how many people you have working with the volunteers, all those 1,100 active volunteers that you've got, but that to me would require, you know, more employees than I currently have running animal control and the shelter.
So it's just me. um, we actually just hired another volunteer coordinator this month, so I did just get some help. But before then, it's been just me managing the different volunteer programs we have in the different areas that we have them. So yeah, 100%, it is a lot. Luckily, our volunteers are amazing though, and offering those volunteer leadership positions really changed my life as well.
I would say about the job descriptions, aligned, not mirrored. So kind of just pulling, you know, and I understand I don't have that issue, so I could go a lot further with that, but just pulling from it so they weren't at opposite ends. And also to help the adoption staff understand that it wasn't that different from training a new employee.
Kathy, if you want to talk offline, I can share some thoughts on how I've finagled and worked through that issue with the union over the years.
Perfect, Chris. You and I have lots to talk about next week then.
I want to know a little bit more too about how, I know, Barbara, you mentioned, you know, sort of upping the appreciation and making that more individual. And I am curious about that. When remote, I love the idea of Calendly, and like that app has saved my life. I love it.
Me too.
If you don't know what it is, check it out, because it's like amazing. It saves so much time if you're a busy person trying to connect with other busy people. It's called calendly.com, and it's pretty affordable. You can actually, there's a free version, and then it's like $10 if you want all the things, $10 a month, but it's totally worth it. So I'm curious though, like some ideas now that we are all remote, how do you show appreciation? And I think it's sort of interesting to think that, because I totally agree, like these events are great, especially for a certain kind of person who is getting a lot of their like socializing from volunteering and sort of like that connectivity. But for some other people who are really doing this for, you know, not for that reason, or for a lot of other reasons, like how do you now through COVID show appreciation for volunteers, and like what ideas do you have, and how do you keep in touch with people and make sure they're happy and have everything they need? And that's for anyone too. I mean, I'd love to hear from all of you, but you know, I'm curious, Barb, because you mentioned yeah, if you,
I was giving other people a chance to talk.
No, I know. I'm so curious, like what are you doing instead of group activities?
So a couple of things are that I do have 2 other staff under me. who were very, prior to my arrival, very like task focused, and some of the complaints was that the volunteers felt like they were bothering them. So now that they're mostly working at home, I told them that when they go on site, don't worry about your laptop unless you need to look up something for a volunteer. Walk around, talk to volunteers, comment on what they're doing. You know, just be there, just be part of it. And I do the same when I go on site. I don't think that I'm going to get any actual, you know, administrative work done. I'm going to do the work of connecting with volunteers. And that's important. And then social media, like I told them, they have to like and comment on some volunteers' Facebook posts every single day. And if there's not one that they can comment on, or there isn't one, then they need to post. And I do the same, so that we're just a presence over and over. And like when someone posts pictures of the dogs, you know, just an appreciative comment to that. Like, oh, you walked a lot of dogs today. That's awesome. Or somebody posts about a cute kitten, you know, oh, so great you're in there today to be with them. I mean, just the little stuff. But I don't know, in my experience, I find the connections and I see what you did and I appreciate it. It goes so much further. I hear about some other shelters doing like a lot of really complex things, like putting yard signs in volunteers' houses and drive-bys like the elementary schools did. And that's not a bad thing. And maybe that really works for some people, and so it's also know your volunteer population. But I just think being reachable and talking to them. Oh, I forgot to mention too, as I mentioned, we tend to be serious here. Our weekly Zoom calls, I bring most of the time I ask a staff member to be our special guest, and they just answer questions. And sorry, I have someone leaving my house. They answer questions about their programs, and the volunteers are really excited that they get to learn, you know, different parts of the organization that way.
We're also really active on social media, especially during COVID when we had only certain staff members here. They would post photos of the dogs or cats that they were working with. Little posts every now and then just saying that they miss the volunteers, miss seeing them around. We also did a few walkthroughs. So we did a Facebook Live through the shelter, so the volunteers could see both the staff members and also the animals that were at the shelter. And that was really well received. We got a lot of comments on that and people really enjoyed that. I sent out cards to volunteers who had a certain number of hours for the year already. So some of our most involved volunteers got a card from me during COVID. And I got a lot of feedback on that too. They really enjoyed just knowing that we didn't forget about them. That's kind of one of the biggest things. We've still continued to send out newsletters. Even when volunteers weren't here, we sent out volunteer newsletters that would have webinars that we thought they should watch, ways that they could increase their animal welfare knowledge when they couldn't come into the shelter. So just little ways to try and keep them connected. Even if we didn't have a lot of different information to share with them, we still shared information.
Lori, I can also share, and thank you so much for both of you being here. We really appreciate you sharing your expertise. And I can share just a little bit from my experience working at a municipal agency for the last 7 years at the City of Sacramento's Front Street Animal Shelter. And I think for volunteers, at least in my experiences, for me, the greatest component I see from the volunteers is really that sense of community, right? Being a part of something, being a part of the shelter family. And so we actually really utilized private Facebook groups as well. I mean, we would do a lot of stuff on our public facing platforms to, you know, appreciate the volunteers, but just sort of the sense of the community that was created between the volunteer Facebook groups, where they would talk, you know, a bit about the animals at the shelter, but also just talk about their own lives. And that's also a place where we would go to talk about, you know, do specific walkthroughs or highlight specific animals. So I think it kind of gave them a sense of pride, because it wasn't just something that was being shared with everybody in the world. This is something that we're specifically doing for them. And it also allowed us to engage with them in a more personal way. And then also, you know, talk to them privately on the side when we saw things that we could really relate with them one-on-one.
One thing that I've noticed, I volunteer with Lost Dog. And one thing we've found has been really kind of conducive to onboarding during COVID is for the marketing team. So we have been pulling people on like mad. And, you know, the other day there was a girl who wrote in and said, I like to make videos. So we were like, all right, here's a dog, you know, here's the contact information, you know, and she like made the greatest video. And the other thing is group walks, because when you're doing a group walk, you've got to be 6 feet away from each other. And so it just is like a natural social distancing activity, but it's also really good for the dogs, and it gives the volunteers a way to be able to kind of interact.
I have another question. So with the mindset of attempting to shift to more of a community-based sheltering process, and also providing more remote services to try to triage situations before animals have to come to our shelter, is anybody innovating or thinking of new volunteer opportunities that are actually remote, where, you know, whether it's telehelp, telesupport, email or resource support, where people can safely from home support your shelter with any of these new programs?
Yeah, we're looking into volunteer support for our new Lost Found initiatives. So we've only recently put all of our communities lost and found animals on our website. Before, it had only been the animals that we had in the shelter, and we were trying to sort of match things behind the scenes. So we're trying to come up with a job description where people can reach out to people that have lost animals and make sure that they're following the advice of flyering and those sorts of things, and help them out. But also people that have found animals, make sure that they're getting scanned, and then just following up on things that we still need. So if we don't have a picture of a found animal, it doesn't do us a whole lot of good to describe it to somebody who's lost it for the most part. And then we're also trying to figure out a job description for volunteers to help people that are trying to rehome their animals as well. So that could be anything from using their technical skills of making flyers and videos, or just knowing how to post effectively on social media can make a big difference in being able to get that animal a home, especially when you're talking about people that aren't technologically savvy, but still want to bring the animal to us, nor do we want it.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. Sophia P, her microphone is not working. She's at a municipal shelter in Houston. Her question is, our team is currently employing split shifts to maximize social distancing. Does anyone have experience or an example schedule of volunteer shifts that would maintain those split shifts? So volunteers A to J can only volunteer on Thursday to Saturday, K to Z can only volunteer Sunday to Wednesday, that type of thing? I guess that's a no.
We haven't done that. We've just limited the number per shift to a pretty small number, and based on areas within the facility, like one person in the cat room, this many people in this area. But we haven't done the split schedule, the AB schedule.
We've been doing the split shift since, I think it was the first week of April. And so the volunteers were told at that time that they could sign up through Volgistics for the A or the B team, which we've been running it Sunday through Wednesday, every other Sunday through Wednesday. Otherwise it's Sunday through I'm trying to think about this, Sunday through Tuesday. So essentially we have all of our staff are working 10-hour shifts, and they work 70 hours in the shelter every 2 weeks. So that 10-hour one day ends up being working from home tasks that we give them. So the volunteers essentially just have to sign up, and then every couple of months we allow them to change teams as long as we don't have a quarantine issue or any issue there. And we try to make that the same weekend that we offer our staff to be able to switch teams as well. Because a lot of people's schedules and their personal lives have changed through this too.
Yeah, we've done kind of both. We've, when we're split in teams, and so when volunteers get onboarded, they get assigned to a team and they can only work on that team. And then we've also limited the number of volunteers per shift. Although it's not really limited because we have more shifts open than we do volunteer coverage. But yeah.
Jordana, I think you had a question in the chat. Did you want to ask it?
I did. Barbara, I was curious, coming from a like 100% volunteer run organization, what would your number one recommendation to us be when it comes to just better integrating volunteers? Like, what mistake are we making that is very obvious to you and maybe not to us?
That is an excellent question. And, you know, I think it's different at every shelter, but I think just limiting your thinking on what you can get a volunteer to do. Like, I'm constantly like, especially like little things like transporting animals. I need to move some cats up to New Jersey. And like, I'm finding that people are like, oh God, you know, would anybody actually want to do that? And I'm like, you know, are you kidding me? The volunteers are lined up. They love doing that. So I think, you know, one thing is don't assume that there's anything they don't want to do. And also I loved, Alicia, you were talking about new staff and new volunteers. So it's like there was some arguing about pet point access, database access for volunteers. And the adoptions director said, you know, you're giving the same access to new employees that we don't do background checks or anything. I mean, maybe the basic one, but you know, they're new and unproven too. So what's the real difference here? So kind of just thinking about it like that, like, you know, we get inexperienced people to come in and do these paid jobs all the time. So, and just in not thinking of, and also the biggest mistake I think I see people make is assuming that volunteers don't want to do anything but play with animals. And that is not true. They want to do a lot of things. Like they love being the subset. Now, some just want to come and do the animals, and that's great. We have those roles. But others also want to be part of the team, and they want to make a difference, and they want to help the organization be better, and they want to share their skills. Like they want you to know that they have a degree in organizational leadership, and they can help you with some of the bigger issues. You know, so like don't limit to thinking, well, they really just want to walk cats and dogs, but maybe we can twist their arm to do this.
Seriously, I've learned that too. There are a couple of volunteers that we got recently who like to do things like maintain spreadsheets, which would make me want to cry. So definitely putting it out there, like, hey, does anybody want to do this job? You know, it's very likely that you'll find somebody.
Yeah, and I'd love to just echo that. And I think in my experiences, our mindset was always that even when it came to volunteers or adoptions or whatever it was, we're really in the business of sales and customer service. And so if you really want people to be engaged with certain volunteer opportunities, you have to highlight them for being great opportunities. And then once they do step into these opportunities, you have to not only engage them, but inspire them to want to continue to do these things. And for us, that was what kind of led to success. And it is a lot more work, but sustainability is key, right? It's better to do that than have to turn around and keep onboarding new people all the time.
I would also say that an organization who really wants to increase their volunteer participation should take a really close look at their current barriers to volunteers. That seems simple, but like really look at them, not only to new people coming, but also to once they're in the building, what are the ways that you give the message to them day in and day out that they are other, that you don't necessarily intend to? Like, I mean, there's some things that have to be separate volunteers and staff, but really look at those things and figure out which are necessary and which are pretty arbitrary, and what you can remove, because the more you do that, the more welcome they feel, the more they get that sense of community and that feeling of belonging.
I love that. That's fantastic. This has been awesome. Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left. Any last questions, thoughts, comments anybody wants to share?
I will say, just going into the chat about lime dipping ringworm caps and like cleaning poopy laundry, it's almost like a badge of honor for volunteers, right? It's like they're proud of this job that they do that nobody else wants to do. So yeah, offer them the gross things. A lot of them want to do it.
That is so true. I'm glad you said that.
I love that. Offer them the gross things.
It makes them feel part of the team, like, right? Like they can say, like, you know, we all talk about poop a lot, right? So if they can say, oh, let me tell you about what I cleaned up this one time, then they've got street cred.
Yeah, and I feel like I always remind staff, like, just because it's something that you don't want to do necessarily, like it's not your choice of task, doesn't mean that it's not somebody else's. So something that is really gross and that I don't want to do, the next person's like, yeah, I'll do that, no problem. So we like project onto volunteers.
I'm writing down the takeaways, and offer them the gross things is definitely number one.
It's
Yeah.
awesome.
That's a good takeaway.
Yeah, it's
I mean-
really true.
Look at those people who like to do the laundry. Who wants to do that? Gross. I don't want to do that. But people love it. Like, they're so proud. We had at Lost Dog, we had volunteers who were like obsessed with making sure that when they left at night, there was nothing dirty that needed to be washed.
Well, and especially when it's people that throughout their whole entire day, they're busy making decisions and they're busy leading things and being directors and CEOs and doing all of this work where it's so much responsibility. Sometimes just for me, even cleaning kennels was almost like therapy because it was so just, you know, nothing but me, the scooper and the poop. And last, I think for us, as far as scalability, Kathy, I know you talk about this and some of these programs are so big. I think people also love the ability to be acknowledged for their worth. And the best way to do that is to really give them additional roles and responsibilities, and also the opportunity to mentor and lead other volunteers. And so as simple as going through your volunteer sort of hour sheet and see which volunteers have invested the most amount of time, having one-on-one conversations with them and allowing them to help develop other volunteers is a great way to scale.
I would say just because a volunteer has been with you for years and years does not mean they will be a good mentor. I learned that the hard way, so I'm just passing that along. That definitely doesn't mean that they're the right person to train people, but they might actually be really great at taking on like a program that you don't have the capacity to build. They might want to do it.
Totally. In Fairfax, Cindy had a volunteer mentor program, and there were like checks and balances. So she would ask the volunteer, you know, how was their mentor? And she would ask the mentor, you know, how was the volunteer? And so she was able to kind of keep it working and make sure that the mentors weren't doing their thing, which I thought was cool.
Yeah, I'm definitely building that into ours. Feedback from both sides. I like the volunteers welcome, Bobby, yes.
Not to, I feel like I'm talking a lot, but I've also learned my lesson with hiring volunteers that don't really want to be hired. Like, they're really excellent volunteers, and so you want to bring them on as staff. And then they really don't want to be staff. They want to just stay as volunteers. So I have learned that the hard way, is that not all volunteers want to do it most of them don't want to do it for a paycheck. So trying to kind of push them into becoming a staff person isn't always a good thing. Even if they're already putting in 40 hours a week, you know.
Because it is really kind of different when you're a volunteer and people are thanking you, but then when you're, you know, the staff, it's different. It's kind of
no one thanks you.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough shift. You know, they go from like getting all this great feedback to, you know, being a staff member, which is great, but it's kind of a weird transition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to explain to them that they can't volunteer once they're working because that overlap. And so that's been a lot of situations that we've run into as well.
Well, thank you all so much. It's great to see all of you, and excited to see you all next week. And thank you so much for joining us today to share your knowledge.
Thanks. It was great to join you guys. Nice to meet most of you.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
It's Friday.
Happy Friday.
Yes, happy Friday.